The relentless California sun beat down on the Central Valley with a fury that turned the earth to dust and the air to furnace heat as Will Thompson rode his exhausted horse through what had once been fertile farmland. The 32-year-old homesteader hadn't eaten a proper meal in 3 days, and his last drop of water had been consumed at dawn, but still he pressed forward toward the distant town of Bakersfield where he hoped to find work that might save his failing farm. Will's 160-acre spread lay 30 miles behind him, a testament to dreams that had withered under the worst drought in living memory. The wheat fields that should have been golden with harvest were instead brown stubble. His vegetable gardens had long since turned to dust, and his well had run dry 2 weeks ago. His wife Emma and their 2 young children were surviving on the charity of neighbors who could barely feed their own families, while Will searched desperately for any opportunity to earn the money they needed to keep from losing everything. As his horse picked its way through a particularly desolate stretch of land where dead cattle lay scattered like grim monuments to the drought's destructive power, Will spotted something that made him rein in his mount for a closer look. Near a cluster of scraggly oak trees that provided the only shade for miles around, a small figure sat motionless in the pitiful shadow. Even from a distance, Will could tell it was a child, and something about the way the figure hadn't moved at the sound of approaching hoofbeats suggested serious trouble. Dismounting on unsteady legs, his own hunger and dehydration were taking their toll. Will approached the motionless form and discovered an Apache boy of perhaps 10 years old, unconscious and clearly dying of thirst in the merciless heat. The child's traditional clothing was torn and dust-covered, his lips were cracked and bleeding, and his small chest rose and fell with the shallow, irregular breathing that indicated severe dehydration. Will's throat was parched, his own body desperate for the precious liquid he no longer possessed, but the sight of this dying child stirred something deeper than self-preservation. He'd carried no water for hours, having consumed his last mouthful at sunrise, but his horse still had a small amount remaining in the emergency reserve he kept for the most desperate circumstances. Without hesitation, Will retrieved the water from his saddle and knelt beside the unconscious boy. The liquid was warm and tasted of leather and metal, but it was life itself to someone facing death from dehydration. Drop by precious drop, Will poured the water between the child's cracked lips, watching as the boy's throat worked instinctively to swallow. The Apache boy's eyes fluttered open after several minutes of careful administration, dark and unfocused at first but gradually clearing as the life-giving water began to restore his awareness. When he saw Will's weathered face hovering above him, concern and compassion clearly visible despite his own obvious suffering, the child's expression shifted from confusion to wonder. "Water," the boy whispered in halting English, his voice barely audible but carrying immense gratitude. "You give water." Will helped the child sit up slowly, supporting his small frame as circulation returned and strength began to flow back into wasted muscles. "What's your name, son? How did you come to be here alone?" "Ayanna," the boy replied, then corrected himself with visible effort. "In your language?" "Bobby. My Apache name means eternal blossom, but white teacher at mission said, I need American name." As Bobby slowly regained his strength with Will's patient assistance, his story emerged in fragments that painted a picture of tragedy all too common in the drought-stricken valley. His family had been part of a small band of Apache who'd been working peacefully on various farms and ranches, trying to survive in a land that seemed determined to kill everything that lived on it. When the drought had destroyed crops and eliminated jobs, they'd been forced to move constantly in search of work and water. Bobby's tale of survival was both heartbreaking and heroic, describing a 10-year-old boy's desperate journey across hostile terrain in search of help for his dying family. His parents and younger sister were hiding in a canyon 5 miles to the south, too weak from hunger and thirst to continue traveling, but hoping that Bobby's youth and energy might allow him to reach help before they all perished. "Mama very sick," Bobby explained, as Will shared small sips of water to help restore his strength. "Papa tries to be strong, but he cannot walk far anymore. Little sister Ayanna cries all the time because she is so thirsty." Will felt his heart clench at the description of a family dying slowly in the desert heat, while their young son risked his life trying to save them. His own desperate circumstances seemed less important than the immediate crisis facing these Apache refugees who'd been reduced to sending a child on what amounted to a suicide mission. "How long have you been walking?" Will asked, studying Bobby's worn moccasins and dust-covered clothing for clues about his ordeal. 3 days, Bobby replied, his young voice carrying a weight of exhaustion that seemed far too heavy for someone his age. "Started with small water skin, but it empty yesterday morning. Kept walking because family will die if I don't find help. Will looked at his own horse, barely able to stand after days of travel on minimal food and water. Then back at the brave child who'd nearly died trying to save his family. The logical choice was clear: he should continue toward Bakersfield, where he might find work that could eventually help his own family survive the continuing drought. But logic had nothing to do with the decision forming in his mind. "Bobby," Will said quietly, "can you ride? I'm going to take you home to your family." The boy's eyes widened with disbelief and desperate hope. "You help my people? Even though we are Apache and you are white man?" "I help because you're a brave boy with a family who needs you," Will replied simply. "And because it's the right thing to do." The journey to Bobby's family took 4 hours through terrain that challenged both Will's navigation skills and his horse's remaining endurance. Bobby proved to be an excellent guide despite his youth, reading landmarks and natural features with the intuitive understanding that marked him as someone born to this harsh environment. As they traveled, Will learned more about the Apache band's desperate circumstances and their peaceful intentions in a land that often viewed all Indians as hostile threats. "We never raid, never steal," Bobby explained as he directed Will toward a hidden canyon that provided minimal shelter from the Sunday. "Just try to work. Try to survive like everyone else. But white men don't trust Apache. Don't give us jobs when times get hard." Will understood that prejudice all too well, having witnessed the casual racism that denied opportunities to people based on their ancestry rather than their character or abilities. His own struggles had taught him that hunger and desperation were universal human experiences that transcended racial boundaries. The canyon where Bobby's family had taken refuge was a heartbreaking testament to human endurance pushed beyond its limits. Will found Bobby's parents, Naalnish and Saya, huddled in whatever shade they could find, while 4-year-old Ayana lay listlessly between them, too weak to do more than whimper softly. All 3 adults were clearly in the advanced stages of dehydration and starvation, their eyes sunken, their skin gray with the approach of death. "Mama, Papa," Bobby called out as they approached, his voice carrying joy and hope that brought tears to Will's eyes. "I found help. Good white man brought me home." The reunion between Bobby and his family was emotional but subdued by their critical condition. Naalnish, clearly the leader despite his weakened state, studied Will with intelligent eyes that reflected both gratitude and wariness born of too many disappointments. "You bring our son home," Naalnish said in careful English, his voice barely above a whisper. "This is kindness we will never forget." Will's assessment of the Apache family's condition revealed that they were hours, perhaps minutes, away from death without immediate intervention. All 4 family members showed signs of severe dehydration and malnutrition that required more help than his limited resources could provide. His horse had no more water to give, his own supplies were exhausted, and the nearest town was still hours away across terrain that none of them could cross in their current condition. But Will had noticed something during their approach to the canyon that offered a glimmer of hope: the remains of an old mining camp, perhaps 2 miles north, abandoned during the drought, but possibly containing a well or cistern that might still hold water. It was a desperate gamble, but desperate circumstances called for desperate measures. "Naalnish," Will said gently, kneeling beside the Apache father, "I'm going to search for water. There's an old mining camp nearby that might have a well. Can you and your family hold on for a few more hours?" Naalnish's weathered face showed understanding of both the necessity and the risk involved in Will's plan. "You have already done more than any white man we have known. If you cannot find water, we understand. At least our boy had chance to try." "I'll find water," Will promised, though privately he knew the odds were against him. "Bobby, you stay with your family. I'll be back before sunset." The abandoned mining camp proved to be a collection of rotting buildings and rusted equipment, but Will's desperate search eventually uncovered what he'd hoped to find: a hand-dug well that had been covered with boards to prevent accidents. When he lowered a bucket improvised from his hat and rope, it came up full of clear, sweet water that represented salvation for the dying Apache family. Working with frantic efficiency, Will filled every container he could find among the abandoned mining equipment, then loaded his exhausted horse with as much water as the animal could carry. The return journey to the canyon seemed to take forever, but when he finally arrived, Bobby's joyful shouts brought the entire family struggling to their feet. The careful process of rehydrating severely dehydrated people required patience and medical knowledge that Will had learned during his own struggles with drought and heat exhaustion. Too much water too quickly could be dangerous. so he administered small amounts at regular intervals while monitoring their responses and gradually increasing the quantities as their bodies adjusted. As the Apache family slowly recovered from their brush with death, Will found himself genuinely enjoying their company and learning to appreciate their perspectives on survival, family loyalty, and the spiritual relationship between humans and the natural world. Bobby proved to be an intelligent and curious child who asked thoughtful questions about Will's farming methods and shared traditional Apache knowledge about desert plants and weather patterns. "My grandfather always said that kindness creates circles that come back to those who give it," Saya told Will as she regained enough strength to participate in conversation. "You saved our lives when you had nothing to gain and much to lose. Such actions create bonds that cannot be broken." Naalnish, revealed to be not just a family man but a respected leader among his people, shared his own perspective on the white stranger who'd risked his safety to help Apache refugees. "We have known many white men who see us as enemies or obstacles, few who see us as human beings deserving of help." As evening approached and the family's immediate crisis passed, Will faced his own difficult decision. His original mission to Bakersfield remained urgent. His own family needed the income he might earn there, and every day of delay brought them closer to losing their farm. But leaving the Apache family alone in the desert, even with water and temporary shelter, felt like abandoning people who'd become more than strangers in distress. "I should continue to town tomorrow," Will said reluctantly as they shared a meager meal of food he'd scavenged from the mining camp. "My own family needs me to find work if we're going to survive this drought." The conversation about Will's need to continue his journey to Bakersfield revealed the complex web of mutual dependence and obligation that had formed between the struggling farmer and the Apache family he'd saved. Bobby's disappointed expression at the thought of losing his newfound protector was matched by his parents' understanding of the economic pressures that drove Will's desperate search for employment. "You have your own family to feed," Naalnish acknowledged with the dignity that marked him as a natural leader. "We understand this burden, because we carry it ourselves. A man must provide for his children, regardless of what other kindnesses his heart might wish to perform." But Saya had been thinking carefully about their situation, and she offered a proposal that surprised everyone around their small campfire. "What if there was another way? What if helping us could also help your family?" Will studied the Apache woman's intelligent face, recognizing the same practical wisdom that had enabled her family to survive in circumstances that would have killed less resourceful people. "What do you mean?" "My husband knows things about this land that white farmers never learn," Saya explained, gesturing toward Naalnish with obvious respect for his knowledge. "Which plants grow in dry times, how to find water beneath the ground, ways to make crops survive when rain does not come. These skills could help your farm prosper, even during drought." Naalnish nodded slowly, his weathered features reflecting decades of accumulated wisdom about desert survival. "Apache have lived in dry lands for many generations. We know secrets that could make your fields green when other farms fail." The proposal that emerged from their evening discussion was unprecedented in the region's history but logical given their mutual needs and complementary skills. Will would take the Apache family to his farm, providing them with shelter and security while they shared their traditional knowledge of drought-resistant agriculture. In exchange, Naalnish and his family would help transform Will's failing homestead into a productive operation that could thrive even in the harsh conditions that had destroyed other farms. "It's risky," Will admitted as they planned the details of their partnership. "A lot of people in this valley don't take kindly to Indians, even peaceful ones. There could be trouble from neighbors who don't understand our arrangement." "There is trouble in dying slowly in desert," Naalnish replied with Apache directness. "There is trouble in watching children starve while land that could feed them lies empty. Sometimes risks must be taken to create opportunities for survival." The journey to Will's farm took 2 days through country that had been devastated by the ongoing drought. Abandoned homesteads dotted the landscape like monuments to broken dreams, while the few remaining families struggled to maintain operations that seemed doomed to failure. The sight of a white farmer traveling with an Apache family attracted curious and sometimes hostile attention from other travelers, but Will's determined demeanor discouraged anyone from challenging their unusual arrangement directly. When they finally arrived at Will's homestead, Emma Thompson's reaction was a mixture of surprise, concern, and the practical compassion that had made her a perfect partner for a man willing to risk everything to help strangers. The modest farmhouse and outbuildings showed the effects of months without adequate income, repairs deferred, equipment deteriorating, and gardens reduced to brown stubble by the relentless drought. Will Thompson, "What have you brought home now?" Emma asked with mock exasperation that couldn't hide her curiosity about the Apache family her husband was helping from their wagon. "People who needed help," Will replied simply, "and who might be able to help us in return." The integration of the Apache family into the Thompson household proceeded more smoothly than anyone had anticipated. Emma and Saya discovered they shared common concerns about feeding children and maintaining households under difficult circumstances, while Bobby and the Thompson children, 8-year-old Mary and 6-year-old James, overcame initial shyness to become fast friends united by the universal language of childhood games and adventures. The transformation of Will's farm under Apache guidance began immediately as Naalnish applied traditional knowledge that had sustained his people through countless droughts and harsh seasons. The older Apache man's understanding of soil composition, water conservation, and drought-resistant crops opened Will's eyes to possibilities he'd never considered, despite years of farming experience. "White farmers fight the drought," Naalnish explained as they surveyed Will's barren fields. "Apache farmers work with dry times, plant seeds that sleep until water comes, save moisture like storing food for winter." The techniques Naalnish demonstrated were both simple and revolutionary, involving careful selection of native plants that could survive on minimal water, sophisticated irrigation methods that captured and conserved every precious drop, and timing strategies that aligned planting schedules with natural rainfall patterns that most settlers ignored. Within weeks, Will's farm began showing signs of life that amazed his drought-stricken neighbors. Crops that should have withered in the heat were thriving under Naalnish's guidance, while water conservation techniques kept the family well from running completely dry. More importantly, the Apache family's presence had brought a sense of hope and purpose that helped the Thompsons cope with their financial struggles. Emma found Saya to be an invaluable partner in managing household resources during the crisis. The Apache woman's knowledge of edible wild plants, food preservation techniques, and traditional medicine provided solutions to problems that had seemed insurmountable. When 6-year-old James developed a fever that threatened to become serious, Saya's herbal remedies and nursing skills proved more effective than any treatment the distant town doctor could have provided. "She saved our boy's life," Emma confided to Will one evening as they watched their children play with Bobby and little Ayana. "That Apache woman knows more about healing than any white doctor I've met." The success of their agricultural innovations attracted attention from neighboring farmers who were struggling with their own drought-related problems. Some visitors came seeking to understand the techniques that were allowing the Thompson farm to prosper while their own operations failed. While others arrived with suspicion and hostility toward the Apache family they blamed for complicating the region's racial dynamics. The first serious challenge to their arrangement came when a delegation of local farmers, led by a bitter man named Jake Morrison, who'd lost his own farm to the drought, and arrived to confront Will about his Indian sympathies. "Thompson," Morrison announced without dismounting, "we've been talking, and we think it's time you got rid of those Apache you're harboring. They're making other folks nervous, and there's talk about whether you can be trusted as a neighbor." Will stepped onto his porch, positioning himself between the visitors and his house where the Apache family waited inside. "Jake, these people saved my farm and probably my family's lives. They're not harming anyone, and they're contributing more to this community than most folks who were born here." "They're Apache," Morrison replied as if that explained everything. "Don't matter if they seem peaceful now, Apache are Apache, and they can't be trusted." The confrontation escalated when Morrison spotted Bobby playing with the Thompson children in the yard, his young Apache features clearly visible despite his adoption of white clothing and customs. "You're letting your kids play with that Indian boy like he's family. What kind of message does that send?" "It sends the message that children are children, regardless of their ancestry," Will replied with growing anger. "And that kindness and cooperation matter more than prejudice and fear." The standoff continued for several tense minutes before Naalnish himself appeared in the doorway, moving with the quiet dignity that marked him as a natural leader despite his current vulnerable position. The Apache elder studied the assembled farmers with intelligent eyes that missed nothing, taking in their hostile attitudes and obvious suspicions. "I am Naalnish," he announced in clear English, his voice carrying the authority of someone accustomed to being heard. "If you have concerns about my family's presence here, speak to me directly rather than threatening the man who saved our lives." Morrison's reaction to being addressed by an Apache was immediate and hostile. "Indian, you got no right to speak up to white men. You should be grateful Thompson's letting you stay at all." "I am grateful," Naalnish replied calmly. "Grateful enough to share knowledge that has made this farm prosper while others fail." grateful enough to help this family succeed where others have given up hope. The tension on Will's property reached a breaking point when Morrison and his supporters realized that the Apache family wasn't simply seeking charity, but was actively contributing to the farm's success through knowledge and techniques that white farmers hadn't mastered. This revelation challenged their assumptions about Apache capabilities and raised uncomfortable questions about their own failures to adapt to drought conditions. "You're saying these Indians know more about farming than men who've been working this land for years?" Morrison demanded, his voice carrying the wounded pride of someone whose worldview was being challenged by inconvenient facts. "I'm saying they know different things," Will replied diplomatically. "Things that work in dry conditions like we're facing now. Things that could help all of us if we were willing to learn instead of argue." The confrontation was interrupted by the arrival of Sheriff Ben Crawford from Bakersfield, responding to reports of potential trouble at the Thompson farm. Crawford was a practical man who'd learned that survival in frontier law enforcement required focusing on actual crimes rather than social tensions that didn't threaten public safety. "Gentlemen," Crawford announced as he dismounted and approached the group, "I've had reports of disputed property rights and possible threats being made. Anyone want to explain what's going on here?" Morrison immediately launched into a complaint about Will's harboring of Apache refugees and the supposed threat they represented to community safety. But his arguments lost force when Crawford observed the obvious prosperity of the Thompson farm compared to the drought-devastated properties of Morrison's supporters. "Mr. Thompson," Crawford said after listening to both sides, "are these Apache folks causing any actual problems? Stealing? Threatening people? Creating public disturbances?" "Sheriff, they've been nothing but helpful," Will replied honestly. "They're living peacefully, working hard, and sharing knowledge that's helped my farm survive when others are failing." Crawford turned to Naalnish with the respectful attention he'd give any law-abiding citizen. "Sir, do you and your family have any intention of causing trouble in this community? We wish only to live peacefully and help those who have shown us kindness," Naalnish replied with dignity. "We have no quarrel with any man who treats us with respect." The sheriff's investigation continued for another hour as he questioned neighbors, examined the farm's condition, and assessed the actual situation rather than relying on rumors and prejudices. His conclusions were clear and unambiguous. The Apache family posed no threat to community safety and was contributing positively to local agricultural efforts. "Mr. Morrison," Crawford announced finally, "I find no evidence of criminal activity or public safety threats on this property. Mr. Thompson has the right to choose his own associates and employees, and these Apache folks appear to be law-abiding residents contributing to community welfare." Morrison's departure with his supporters marked the end of the immediate crisis, but Will knew their opposition hadn't disappeared. It had simply gone underground where it might emerge in more dangerous forms. However, the sheriff's official recognition of their arrangement provided legal protection that would make future harassment more difficult. More importantly, other farmers who'd witnessed the confrontation had observed the stark contrast between Will's thriving operation and their own struggling efforts. Within days, several neighbors approached discreetly seeking advice about drought-resistant techniques and water conservation methods that might save their own farms. "Word's getting around about what you and Naalnish have accomplished here," Emma observed one evening as they watched another farmer leave after a consultation about irrigation techniques. "People are starting to see results matter more than prejudices." The growing reputation of their cooperative farming methods attracted attention from unexpected quarters, including territorial agricultural officials who were searching for solutions to the ongoing drought crisis. A delegation arrived from Sacramento with authority to investigate and potentially recommend their techniques for broader implementation throughout California's agricultural regions. "Mr. Thompson," announced Agricultural Commissioner David Hayes, "we've received reports of innovative farming methods being employed on your property. Methods that appear to be producing remarkable results despite the current drought conditions." The official investigation that followed documented the specific techniques that Naalnish had introduced, the improvements in crop yields and water efficiency, and the potential for adapting these methods to other farms throughout the drought-stricken region. The Apache elder found himself treated as a valuable consultant whose knowledge could benefit thousands of struggling farmers. Traditional Apache agricultural methods represent centuries of adaptation to arid conditions, Commissioner Hayes concluded in his formal report. The integration of this knowledge with modern farming techniques could revolutionize agricultural practices throughout the southwestern territories. The official recognition of Naalnish's agricultural expertise marked a turning point that transformed both the Apache family's status and Will's farm from a local curiosity into a model operation that attracted visitors from throughout California and beyond. Agricultural officials, farming cooperatives, and individual homesteaders arrived regularly seeking to learn the drought-resistant techniques that had made the Thompson farm prosperous while others failed. Naalnish, revealed to be not just a knowledgeable farmer but a gifted teacher, he began conducting formal workshops that shared traditional Apache agricultural wisdom with white settlers who'd previously viewed Indians as obstacles to progress rather than sources of valuable knowledge. His patient explanations of soil management, water conservation, and crop selection opened minds that had been closed by prejudice and ignorance. Plants are like people, Naalnish explained to a group of visiting farmers. Some strong enough to survive hard times, some need much care and water. Smart farmer chooses plants that match the conditions, not the conditions he wishes he had. The success of these educational programs created opportunities that neither Will nor Naalnish had anticipated when they'd first formed their desperate partnership. Requests for consultation services provided steady income that complemented the farm's agricultural production, while the Apache family's elevated status in the agricultural community offered protection from the racial prejudices that had initially threatened their safety. Bobby, now 11 years old and thriving under the combined influences of Apache heritage and white education, had become a bridge between communities that had previously known only suspicion and mistrust. His natural intelligence and easy movement between cultures made him valuable as a translator and cultural interpreter, helping to prevent misunderstandings that could have undermined the cooperative relationships his family had worked to build. Bobby's going to be something special, Emma observed one evening as they watched the boy help his father demonstrate irrigation techniques to a group of visiting farmers. He understands both worlds and can help them work together. The prosperity that flowed from their agricultural innovations allowed Will to expand his operations while maintaining the family atmosphere that had made their farm a model of successful cooperation. He purchased additional land, improved his equipment, and hired workers from both white and Apache communities on equal terms, creating employment opportunities that benefited everyone involved. But the most significant development came in the autumn, when Naalnish announced that other members of his extended Apache band had decided to settle in the area, drawn by reports of the peaceful and prosperous life his family had found with the Thompsons. These weren't refugees seeking charity, but skilled workers and farmers who could contribute to the regional economy while maintaining their cultural identity. My cousin Cochise brings his family and others who want to live in peace, Naalnish explained to Will during one of their evening planning sessions. They have skills, they want to work, they need only opportunity to prove their value to white neighbors. The expansion of Apache settlement in the region required careful negotiation with local authorities and neighboring farmers who remained suspicious of increased Indian presence. Will found himself serving as an unofficial mediator, using his reputation and the demonstrated success of his partnership with Naalnish to advocate for policies that would allow peaceful integration while addressing legitimate security concerns. The breakthrough came when Sheriff Crawford proposed a formal arrangement that would recognize the Apache settlers as contributing members of the community, while providing oversight that satisfied nervous white residents. The Apache would register with territorial authorities, accept periodic inspections, and agree to resolve disputes through established legal channels, rather than traditional tribal methods. This gives everyone what they need, Crawford explained to the mixed group of Apache and white representatives who'd gathered to discuss the proposal. The Apache get legal recognition and protection, while white folks get assurance that there's proper oversight and accountability. Naalnish's response reflected both Apache pragmatism and their deep desire for peaceful coexistence with their white neighbors. We accept these conditions because they allow us to live with dignity while proving our commitment to peace. Papers and inspections are small price for security and respect. The formal agreement establishing the Apache settlement created the first legally recognized multicultural agricultural community in California's Central Valley, setting precedents that would influence state and federal Indian policy for decades to come. Will's farm became the unofficial headquarters for this experiment in peaceful coexistence, serving as neutral ground where Apache and white families could meet to resolve disputes, plan cooperative projects, and build the trust necessary for long-term success. The arrangement faced its first major test when a severe economic downturn hit California in 1885, bankrupting many farms and creating competition for scarce resources that could have escalated into racial violence. Instead, the cooperative relationships that had developed around Will's farm provided a model for sharing resources and supporting struggling families regardless of their ethnic background. When times get hard, people either help each other or hurt each other, Naalnish observed during a community meeting to address the economic crisis. We have chosen to help, and this choice makes us all stronger. The mutual support network that emerged during the downturn included Apache families sharing traditional knowledge about wilderness survival and food sources, while white farmers provided access to equipment and markets that individual Apache families couldn't reach independently. Children from both communities continued attending school together, learning from teachers who represented both cultures and developing friendships that transcended racial boundaries. Emma had become a leader in organizing women's activities that brought Apache and white families together for practical purposes like food preservation, child care, and medical care. Her partnership with Saya in particular had demonstrated that cooperation between cultures could benefit everyone involved while respecting individual traditions and values. Working together makes us all more capable, Emma explained to visitors who came to study their community. Saya knows things about healing and food that I never learned, while I know things about white customs and opportunities that help her family succeed. The success of their agricultural and social innovations attracted attention from the highest levels of California government, including a visit from the territorial governor who wanted to understand how their community had achieved peaceful integration while other regions struggled with racial tensions and economic failures. What you've accomplished here challenges fundamental assumptions about Indian-white relations, Governor Hayes told Will during an official inspection of the settlement. This could serve as a model for peaceful development throughout the Western Territories, but the most significant test of their community came when reports reached them of Apache uprisings in other territories where government policies had failed to provide adequate food, security, or respect for tribal rights. Federal authorities immediately became concerned about the loyalty of Apache settlers in California, while some white residents worried about potential sympathies with hostile tribes. The crisis deepened when a group of young Apache warriors from Arizona arrived at the settlement, claiming to be refugees from military persecution but possibly representing a more dangerous challenge to the peaceful community that Will and Naalnish had worked so hard to build. Their presence created exactly the kind of situation that skeptics had warned about outsiders who might influence local Apache toward hostility or resistance. "We seek sanctuary among our people who have found peace with white neighbors," announced the leader of the newcomers, a young warrior named Geronimo who carried himself with the pride and defiance that marked him as someone unaccustomed to compromise. Naalnish found himself caught between his obligation to provide hospitality to fellow Apache and his responsibility to protect the peaceful community that had become home to his family. The decision he made would affect not just the immediate crisis but the long-term viability of the multicultural experiment they'd all worked to create. "Brothers," Naalnish addressed the newcomers in Apache, his words translated by Bobby for the white officials who were present. "You are welcome among us, as long as you accept the peace we have made with our white neighbors. This is place of cooperation, not conflict." The negotiations that followed tested every relationship and alliance that had been built over the past 2 years. The young warriors were hungry, exhausted, and bitter about their treatment by federal authorities, but they were also impressed by the prosperity and security that the settlement had achieved through peaceful means. The resolution of the crisis with the refugee Apache warriors demonstrated the strength and resilience of the community that Will and Naalnish had built around principles of mutual respect and practical cooperation. After several days of tense negotiations, the newcomers agreed to accept the settlement's peaceful arrangements in exchange for sanctuary and the opportunity to rebuild their lives without constant fear of military pursuit. "We have seen too much war, too much running," Geronimo admitted during a private conversation with Naalnish and Will. "If you have found a way to live with dignity among white people, perhaps it is time to try peace instead of fighting battles we cannot win." The integration of the refugee warriors required careful planning and constant vigilance to prevent misunderstandings that could have destroyed years of patient relationship building. Will and Naalnish worked together to assign the newcomers to work crews that paired them with established community members, both Apache and white, who could help them understand and adapt to the cooperative culture that governed daily life in the settlement. Sheriff Crawford played a crucial role in reassuring nervous white residents that the increased Apache population didn't represent a security threat to the broader community. His regular inspections and reports to territorial authorities provided official documentation that the settlement continued to operate peacefully and productively, despite its growing size and complexity. "These folks are no more dangerous than any other group of farmers and workers," Crawford reported to his superiors. They're following the law, contributing to the local economy, and resolving their disputes through proper legal channels rather than violence. The successful integration of the refugee warriors marked a turning point that transformed the settlement from a local experiment into a model that attracted national attention. Newspaper reporters, government officials, and academic researchers arrived regularly to study how former enemies had learned to live and work together so successfully. But perhaps the most significant development was found in the children who'd grown up in this multicultural environment, young people who moved easily between Apache and white customs, while developing their own unique perspectives on cooperation, justice, and community responsibility. Bobby Thompson, he'd taken Will's surname as a symbol of his adopted family status, had become a natural leader, whose bilingual abilities and cultural knowledge made him valuable as a mediator and translator. These young people represent the future we're trying to build, Will observed one evening as he watched Apache and white teenagers working together on a community irrigation project. They don't see the barriers that divided their parents' generation. The settlement's prosperity continued to grow as agricultural innovations developed through Apache-white cooperation proved successful even during the worst drought conditions. Their techniques for water conservation, soil management, and crop selection were being adopted throughout California's agricultural regions, while their social model of peaceful integration influenced policy discussions at the highest levels of government. Emma had documented many of these innovations in a detailed journal that became the basis for articles in agricultural magazines and government reports on successful Indian policy implementation. Her writing emphasized the practical benefits of cooperation, while also capturing the personal relationships that made their community work. Success isn't just about farming techniques or economic prosperity, she wrote in one widely published article. It's about seeing each other as human beings first, neighbors second, and different races last. When people focus on what they can accomplish together, differences become strengths rather than obstacles. The community's reputation for peaceful cooperation and economic success provided protection during the Indian Wars that plagued other Western territories throughout the 1,882. Federal authorities were reluctant to disrupt an arrangement that was working so well, while local white residents had come to value their Apache neighbors as essential contributors to regional prosperity. When Naalnish finally passed away at the age of 78, his funeral became a celebration that brought together hundreds of people whose lives had been touched by his wisdom and leadership. Apache and white families mourned together for a man who'd proven that enemies could become family when they chose to honor each other's humanity. "He saved more than my farm," Will said during the ceremony, his voice thick with emotion as he remembered the dying Apache elder he'd helped rescue years before. "He saved my understanding of what it means to be a good neighbor and a decent human being." The legacy of the Thompson Apache settlement extended far beyond its original boundaries, as the model of peaceful cooperation influenced territorial and federal policies throughout the American West. Government officials who'd initially been skeptical of informal arrangements began to see practical benefits that formal reservation systems couldn't match, while agricultural innovations developed through Apache-white cooperation revolutionized farming practices throughout California's Central Valley. Bobby Thompson, now a young man of 25 with a deep understanding of both cultures, had become one of the most respected agricultural consultants in the Western Territories. His ability to bridge cultural differences while implementing practical solutions made him invaluable to farmers, government officials, and Apache communities throughout the region. "Everything I learned about cooperation, respect, and hard work came from watching my two fathers work together," Bobby reflected during an interview with a visiting journalist. "Will Thompson taught me that kindness creates opportunities, while Naalnish showed me that wisdom comes from understanding the land and honoring those who share it with you." The settlement itself had grown into a thriving town of nearly 400 residents, with Apache and white families living side by side in homes that reflected both architectural traditions. The original farm that Will had nearly lost to drought had become the center of an agricultural cooperative that managed thousands of acres using techniques that maximized productivity while conserving precious water resources. Emma Thompson, now in her 50s but still actively involved in community leadership, had established a school that served as a model for multicultural education throughout the territories. Children learned in both English and Apache, studied both traditional native knowledge and modern academic subjects, and developed the skills necessary to succeed in either culture while maintaining pride in their heritage. "Our children grow up knowing that different doesn't mean dangerous," Emma explained to visitors who came to study their educational methods. They learned that every culture has valuable knowledge to share, and that cooperation creates possibilities that no single group could achieve alone. The protection network that had developed around the settlement proved its value repeatedly as the Indian Wars continued to rage in other territories. Apache warriors who'd chosen peaceful integration served as scouts and mediators, helping prevent conflicts that could have destroyed years of patient relationship building. Their intimate knowledge of tribal politics and military tactics made them invaluable allies in maintaining regional stability. Will himself had become something of a legend throughout California. His transformation from a struggling drought victim into a prosperous community leader, inspiring countless stories about the power of individual kindness to create lasting change. But he remained fundamentally the same man who'd given his last water to a dying Apache boy, someone who judged people by their character rather than their ancestry. People ask me what made our community successful when so many others failed. Will told a group of territorial officials who'd come to study their methods. The answer is simple. We treated each other like family from the very beginning. When you share your last drink of water with someone, you've already decided they're worth saving. Everything else grows from that basic choice. The drought that had nearly destroyed Will's original farm eventually ended, but the agricultural techniques developed during those desperate years continued to provide advantages that made the settlement one of the most productive farming regions in California. More importantly, the relationships forged during that crisis had created bonds strong enough to survive prosperity as well as hardship. When Will passed away at the age of 71, surrounded by children and grandchildren who carried both Apache and white blood in their veins, his funeral became a celebration that brought together communities from across the Western Territories. Apache warriors rode from distant settlements to honor the white man who'd proven that a simple act of kindness could change the course of history. Will Thompson, now the acknowledged leader of the community his adoptive father had helped create, spoke at the ceremony with words that captured the essence of what they'd all accomplished together. Will Thompson taught us that the greatest wealth isn't found in the ground or earned through conquest, it's discovered in the simple act of sharing what you have with someone who needs it. He gave his last water to save an Apache boy's life, and that choice created ripples of hope that will flow forward through generations. The settlement continued to thrive long after both Will and Naalnish had passed into legend, serving as proof that former enemies could become family when they chose to see each other's humanity rather than their differences. The farm that had nearly failed during the drought became a pilgrimage site for those seeking to understand how individual acts of compassion could transform entire communities. And in the end, that may have been the most remarkable legacy of all, the demonstration that in a harsh land, torn by racial hatred and economic desperation, ordinary people could choose kindness over fear, cooperation over conflict, and hope over despair. The story lived on in the children who grew up knowing that Apache and white neighbors were simply different ways of being human, in the agricultural techniques that continued to feed families throughout the West, and in the enduring proof that sometimes the smallest acts of generosity could create the largest changes in the world. Years later, when historians wrote about the transformation of California's Central Valley from a battleground of cultures into a functioning multicultural society, they often cited the partnership between Will Thompson and Naalnish as a turning point that demonstrated the possibility of peaceful coexistence. But for those who lived through it, the most important lesson wasn't political or economic, it was personal. That courage to share your last drop of water with a stranger could create bonds stronger than blood, hopes brighter than gold, and legacies that would never be forgotten.